3:12 a.m. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was the monitor. A flat mechanical beep cutting through the maternity wing like a blade. Steady. Cold. Indifferent to everything happening on the other side of that door. Kaler Varelli stood in the hallway with his black silk tie still knotted. Suit pressed. Jaw locked. His two brothers flanked him without speaking. Draven on the left, Zevin on the right, both watching the frosted glass panel like men waiting for a verdict. None of them moved. None of them reached for the door. Inside the room, Soren Hale labored without a single sound. His wrists trembled against the white sheet. His mouth stayed closed. Tears moved down his face in long, quiet lines, not from weakness, but from a body pushed past what composure could contain. He had refused heavy sedation. Minimum only. He needed to be present. He needed to feel every second of this. As if pain was proof. As if surviving it would mean something. The nurse stepped out, mask still on. She looked directly at Kaler. Complications, she said. Low. Controlled. Choosing the word carefully. Kaler's expression didn't change. Draven shifted his weight. Zevin crossed his arms. And the hallway went back to silence. HI viewers. Quick question before we go further. If someone you trusted left you completely alone in your hardest moment, would you still reach for them? Drop your answer in the comments. The twins came at 36 weeks. Premature. Small. Fighting. The first cry punched through the wall at 3:47 a.m. sharp. Uneven. Like something raw being introduced to air for the first time. Then the second. 2. Kaler pushed the door open. The room smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Machines blinked in rows. A bassinet had been positioned near the far wall. A nurse moved with careful, practiced hands. Soren lay back against the elevated bed. Pale. Shaking slightly. Eyes still open. He saw Kaler the moment he walked in. And something moved across his face. Not joy. Not relief exactly. Something older than both of those. Something desperate and quiet and worn down to its thinnest edge. He reached out. One hand. Slow. Trembling. Fingers extended toward Kaler across 18 inches of hospital air. Kaler stepped back. One full step. Clean. Deliberate. Don't touch me. Not loud. Not cruel. Controlled. Soren's hand stayed in the air for 1 second too long. Then it dropped. The nurse near the bassinet stopped moving. She didn't look up. She understood what kind of rooms these were. Rooms where power walked in wearing good suits and left damage no chart could document. Kaler stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at both infants. He looked for a long time. The nurse moved to adjust the monitoring line on the nearest twin. She glanced up, just briefly, at Kaler. They both have your eyes, she said quietly. She didn't mean it as a weapon. But it landed like one. Kaler's jaw shifted. Something moved behind his expression. Small. Almost nothing. Almost. He turned and walked back to the door. And the monitor kept beeping. Steady. Cold. Indifferent. Like it didn't know a fracture had just opened in the middle of the room. Comment below. Do you think Kaler stepped back because he didn't care? Or because he was protecting something? Because that answer changes everything in the next chapter. The security reroute notification came through at 4:03 a.m. Kaler's phone lit up before he even reached the hallway bench. He read it once, then again. Then he looked up at the frosted glass and said nothing. Draven was already typing. Zevin was already on a call. Voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The Varelli machine had started moving. Not because of the twins. Because of exposure risk. That was the calculation. That was always the calculation. Inside the room, Soren stared at the ceiling. His hand had gone back to the sheet. Flat. Still. He had stopped shaking. Not because the pain had left, but because shaking required energy he didn't have left to spend. A nurse checked his blood pressure. Wrote something. Left. No one stayed. Soren had known what this night could be. He had known it for months. He had written small notes to himself in a worn notebook. Thoughts he couldn't say out loud. Questions he couldn't ask. He kept that notebook under a thin mattress in the guarded townhouse where the Varelli security detail had stationed him after the pregnancy became visible. For your safety, they had told him. He had believed them. He had believed a lot of things. Soren's father had been a union organizer, dock worker, a man who spent 18 months building a case against port contractors in New Jersey and Savannah. Contracts that used Omega laborers under a classification system that kept their wages off formal payroll and their injuries off official record. The Varelli name had come up in those documents. Not Kaler specifically. The syndicate, the structure, the way it had been run for a generation before Kaler took operational control and quietly changed the billing language without ever publicly admitting what the old language had done. Soren's father had pushed that story to 3 journalists. 2 had been paid off. 1 had been discredited. His father had been brought in for a compliance review that lasted 6 months and ended with a settlement he wasn't allowed to discuss. And Soren had been flagged. Not by Kaler, by the system around Kaler, the one that moved before he gave orders, because it had learned to anticipate what needed to be contained. Leverage classifications were not written into any public document. They were internal. Category designations assigned to individuals connected to sensitive historical exposure. Soren had entered the system as Category 4. He had met Kaler at a private function 2 years after his father's settlement. He hadn't known then what he knew now. He had seen a man who seemed different from what the rumors described. Precise, yes, but not careless. Controlled, yes, but not contemptuous. He had stayed because he believed that. He had stayed, and 1 year in, he had believed it even more. And then the pregnancy had started. And something had shifted. Small at first. Kaler's visits getting shorter. His explanations thinning. His phone always present, always face down. Always creating a distance that wasn't physical but was just as real. Soren hadn't fought it. He wasn't built for that kind of fight. He wrote notes instead. Slipped them under doors. Left them on counters. Most of them were never answered directly. Some were never acknowledged at all. Now, at 4:11 a.m., Soren turned his face toward the bassinet. Both twins were breathing. Small, even rhythms. Clean and steady in a way that nothing else in the room was. His phone, the basic one the security detail allowed, buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. 3 words. Media knows something. Soren read it, then set the phone face down. Because of course that was the part that would move people tonight. Not the blood. Not the labor. Not the twins drawing breath for the first time. The media. The image. Outside in the hallway, Kaler was reading the same alert from a different angle. His middle brother Draven had texted one clean sentence. Media flagged unusual hospital security protocol movement. We clean this now or it spreads. Reputation versus reality. Kaler read it, pocketed his phone, pushed the delivery room door open again. Soren didn't look at him this time. He stayed facing the bassinet. His left hand was flat on the mattress beside him. Not reaching, not extended, just there. Kaler stood in the doorway for 11 seconds. Long enough to hear the monitor. Long enough to see the slow rise of Soren's chest. Long enough to understand, in some part of himself he hadn't cleared space for, that the silence in this room was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something he had chosen not to answer. He moved toward the bed. 3 steps. His hand came up almost to Soren's shoulder. He stopped, because crossing that line meant something. It meant the image changed. It meant the structure cracked publicly enough to matter. It meant Draven and Zevin and every board member who had ever used the word unity as a leash would have ammunition. He pulled his hand back. Soren still hadn't looked at him. That was heavier than anything he could have said. Kaler turned and walked out. And back in the room, behind the closed door, Soren reached for a small piece of paper on the side table. He wrote 4 words, then folded it. Then held it in his closed fist like it was the only thing in the room he still owned. Draven Varelli didn't raise his voice. He never did. He stood near the window at the end of the maternity wing corridor, city lights blurred by tinted glass, and he spoke in the way their father had taught all three of them to speak. Even, measured. Like every word had been cleared through legal first. The acknowledgement changes the vote weight, he said. Kaler looked at him. Say it plainly. Draven turned from the window. If you publicly claim those children, the internal charter shifts. Biological heirs under Varelli documentation alter the succession clause. My allocation and Zevin's allocation both compress. He let that sit for a moment. This isn't personal. This is structural. I know what it is, Kaler said. Then you know why the timing matters. Zevin was on the far side of the hall, one shoulder against the wall, arms folded. Watching. He hadn't contributed to the conversation. He didn't need to. Zevin operated through proximity. His silence was always a vote. The Varelli rule had 3 pillars. No visible emotional attachment. No heirs without unanimous internal alignment. Unity above all public perception. Their father had built it. Their grandfather had tested it. They had inherited it as law, not suggestion, not tradition, but law. The kind written into corporate charter amendments and verbal agreements sealed in rooms without recording devices. Kaler had never fought the rule. He had operated inside it because he understood what it protected. The Varelli name generated leverage because it generated certainty. Certainty attracted contracts. Contracts created insulation. Insulation kept power stable. That was the logic. He had lived inside that logic for 31 years. But tonight, in a delivery room with a monitor counting heartbeats that carried his blood, the logic had developed a sound. A thin, high sound, like something underweight that wasn't built for it. Draven stepped closer. The nurse who was inside the room this evening, her badge was scanned at entry. There's a secondary log showing she accessed a non-standard communication terminal on the 3rd floor at 4:42 a.m. Kaler went still. She sold footage? He asked. We don't know what she sold. We know she accessed something she had no clearance for at an unusual hour. The system flagged it 40 minutes ago. Kaler processed that. Someone had been inside his moment. Not to document it legitimately. Not for any function a hospital required. To monetize it. Or to arm someone with it. Who's the buyer? Kaler asked. Unknown. The access terminal reroutes through a third-party media clearinghouse. Could be press. Could be something with more reach. Zevin finally spoke. Could be Renata's people. He said the name flatly. No heat. Just identification. Renata Foss. Majority partner in a rival syndicate operating out of Baltimore and Philadelphia. She had been circling Varelli port contracts for 2 years. Patient. Methodical. The kind of competitor who didn't attack directly. She built context first. She collected moments. Inconsistencies. Contradictions between public image and private behavior. Then she sold the narrative. Kaler thought about the delivery room. About what footage from that room might show. A man in a tailored suit standing at the foot of a hospital bed. An omega reaching. A step backward. 2 words. Don't touch me. That footage, with no context, with no internal logic attached, told exactly the story Renata would want told. Not strategy. Not protection. Cruelty. A powerful man refusing a vulnerable omega in the first moments of his children's lives. That image would not require explanation to spread. It would only require upload. Kaler looked down the corridor. Find the terminal log. Find the transfer path. Intercept whatever left that clearinghouse. Draven nodded once. And the children? He asked. Kaler turned toward the window. The city sat quiet below. 4:50 a.m. Still dark. The hour when decisions made couldn't be blamed on impulse. Only intention. Nothing changes tonight, he said. Draven accepted that. Zevin unfolded his arms. Neither of them questioned it. Because that was the other part of the Varelli rule that never got written down. Agreement didn't require understanding. It only required compliance. They moved down the corridor. Kaler stayed at the window. He stood there long enough for the city lights to lose focus. Long enough to hear, faintly from 3 rooms away, the thin, even sound of 2 infants breathing. His phone lit up. A message on his private encrypted channel. No name attached. No account trace. For words. Succession requires strategic clarity. He read it twice. Then he looked at the door to Soren's room. And he understood that whatever came next, this had already started without him. The document arrived at 6:18 a.m. Internal audit. Flagged manually by Kaler's personal compliance liaison. A woman named Adiz Moro who had been with the Varelli operation for 11 years and who had a talent for finding what other people had tried to bury under normal-looking numbers. Kaler read it in the hospital consultation room down the hall from the maternity wing. Fluorescent lights. Paper coffee cup. The kind of unremarkable space that made everything feel more clinical than it was. The report was 42 pages. He read the summary section 3 times. Encrypted financial transfers. 17 of them over a period of 8 weeks. Each one small enough to pass standard threshold alerts. Combined, they totaled just under $4 million. Routed through a subsidiary account tied to Draven's operational division. Draven, not Zevin. Not a legacy holdover account from their father's era. Draven. Kaler set the document down. He picked it up again. The transfers were dated. The earliest one coincided with the week Soren's pregnancy had been formally noted in the internal medical record, the one maintained for individuals under Varelli security management. The timeline wasn't coincidence. Someone had begun moving money the moment the twins became documented reality. Kaler thought back through the last 8 weeks with a precision that was almost uncomfortable, the way a man reviews a film he thought he understood and suddenly sees the frame he missed. Draven's calm at every meeting. His measured logic about the succession clause tonight in the corridor. The way he had already known exactly what to say. Already had the charter language ready. Draven had been preparing. Not responding. Preparing. Which meant the coldness Kaler had maintained in that delivery room. The step back, the controlled distance, the refusal to cross the line in front of Soren. Had not been performed for his own reasons alone. He had been watched. He had been baited. The rejection footage, if it existed, was not accidental exposure. Someone had wanted it captured. Someone had wanted Kaler standing there, suit on, jaw locked, stepping away from an Omega in labor. Because that image had a function. It could be used internally to justify Draven's position. That Kaler was unstable, inconsistent, unfit to hold sole operational authority. That his personal entanglement with a classified Omega was a liability that required correction. Or it could be used externally, sold to Renata Foss's network, to publicly fracture the Varelli reputation before Kaler had a chance to restructure it on his own terms. Either way, either outcome served Draven. Kaler closed the document. He sat in the fluorescent room for a long moment. The problem with understanding a trap after you've walked into it is that the understanding doesn't free you from it. It just tells you exactly where the walls are. He had stepped back from Soren believing he was protecting the structure. He had not known the structure had already been moved around him. That distinction mattered. Not to Soren, not yet, because intention and impact are not the same thing, and damage doesn't reduce because the person who caused it didn't plan to. The step back had still happened. The words had still been said. Soren had still lain in that bed, reaching, and felt the air where Kaler's presence should have been. That was real, and the reason behind it didn't make it less real. But it changed what came next. Kaler stood, folded the audit report into the inside pocket of his jacket, walked to the consultation room door and held it open for 3 seconds before stepping out. Down the corridor. 3rd room on the left. He pushed it open quietly. Soren was awake. The bassinet had been moved closer to his bed. Both twins were sleeping small, bundled forms under hospital-issue blankets. One on each side of the middle divider. Soren looked up when the door opened. His expression was not warm. It was not hostile. It was the face of someone who had already made their calculations and was simply waiting to see if the world would confirm them. Kaler stood in the doorway. He should have had words ready. He had built his entire professional existence on having words ready, on knowing exactly what to say in rooms where the wrong sentence cost millions. He had nothing. He looked at the twins. He looked at Soren. He looked at the paper folded near Soren's right hand. A small square worn at the corners, like it had been creased and uncreased more than once. He didn't ask what it said. He already had a feeling. His phone buzzed. Private channel again. Same anonymous sender. 3 words this time. Choose before morning. Kaler read it. Pocketed the phone. And for the first time in years, in a fluorescent hospital room at 6:31 a.m. Watching a mute Omega hold a folded note near 2 sleeping infants, Kaler Varelli felt the exact weight of every decision that had led him here. Not guilt. Not yet. But proximity to it. Close enough to feel the heat. The boardroom had no windows. This was intentional. The Varelli Executive Conference space on the 41st floor occupied the interior core of the building. No natural light, no sightlines to the street, no environmental information that could anchor time or weather or the outside world. Only the table, only the chairs, only the people inside it and whatever they had chosen to bring. Kaler arrived at 9 a.m. Exactly. His brothers were already seated. Draven at the far end, suit jacket buttoned, hands flat on the table. Zevon to the right, posture loose, watching the door with the careful neutrality of someone who had already decided which way this was going. Adiz Moro sat to Kaler's left. She had 3 documents in front of her, tabbed at specific pages, arranged in the exact order she had been instructed to arrange them. The room also held 2 outside board members, non-family, appointed for precisely this kind of moment, when the Varelli structure required external witnesses to validate procedural outcomes. Nobody spoke when Kaler sat down. He had learned long ago that whoever spoke first in a room like this gave up something. Not always much, but something. And in a room where everything was already close, small advantages mattered. He waited 9 seconds. Then he opened the first document. The audit findings from Adiz's review are entered into the record, he said. 17 encrypted transfers. Combined total of 3.8 million. Originating account traces to Division 7 billing. That's your division, Draven. Draven didn't blink. Those transfers have a legitimate accounting explanation, he said. Infrastructure reallocation prior to the port audit review in Q3. I'm happy to walk through the documentation. We don't need the walkthrough, Kaler said. We need the dates. Adiz opened the second document. The first transfer is dated 8 weeks ago, she said without looking up. Specifically, the same week that a medical record notation was entered into the private Varelli health management file for a secured individual under internal oversight. Silence. The 2 outside board members exchanged a glance. Draven's posture didn't change, but his hands, which had been flat on the table, moved 2 centimeters to the left. A small adjustment, barely perceptible. Kaler saw it. Additionally, Adiz continued, a communication terminal on the 3rd floor of East Side General was accessed at 4:42 this morning by a staff member with clearance to Varelli secured patient records. Terminal reroutes through Meridian Media Clearinghouse. She paused. Meridian Media Clearinghouse has an operating account with a shell company registered in Delaware. That shell company was funded by a second-tier transfer from Division 7. Second transfer. Same 8-week period. Zevon unfolded his arms. Even he hadn't known that part. You funded the leak, Kaler said. Not a question. Draven was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then, the footage was security insurance. If you made a decision that destabilized the board structure, that footage was a corrective mechanism. It would have triggered a review clause under Section 14 of the operating charter. I was protecting the syndicate. You were protecting your allocation, Kaler said. Those are the same thing. They are not, Kaler said. Flat. Final. He turned to the two outside board members. Section 9, Article 3 of the Varelli Operating Charter. Any board member found to have created, funded, or enabled an unauthorized external media exposure mechanism using internal resources is subject to immediate operational authority review. He looked back at Draven. We're reviewing. The vote was procedural. Clean. Draven could contest it. He would. Through attorneys, through charter arguments, through every bureaucratic tool available to a man who had spent 20 years learning exactly where the bodies were buried in his own organization. But today, in this room, his operational authority was suspended. No shouting. No spectacle. No scene that anyone could record and sell. The outside board members signed the documentation. Adiz collected the pages. Draven stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Kaler for a moment. Not with fury, not with desperation, but with the expression of a man making a note. Filing something away for later. He left without a word. Zevin waited until the door closed. He'll move through secondary channels, he said. I know, Kaler said. This doesn't end today. I know that too. Zevin studied him. What made you pull the audit? You weren't looking for it. Kaler thought about Adiz in the consultation room at 6 a.m. He thought about the message on his private encrypted channel. He thought about Soren in the hospital bed, face turned away, hand flat on the sheet. He didn't answer Zevin's question directly. Instead, he opened the third document. Legal recognition filing for both children, he said. Full Varelli documentation. Protective designation. Initiated this morning before I walked in here. Zevin read the top of the page. He didn't object. He didn't celebrate. He just looked at Kaler the way people look at someone when they realize the decision was already made and the meeting was just confirmation. Okay, Zevin said. The meeting adjourned. Kaler stayed in the room after the others left. He sat at the long table under the controlled lighting, in the room with no windows, and he read the legal filing from the beginning. 2 names, not yet chosen, placeholder entries, but the line for them existed now. Documented, official, part of the structure. His phone buzzed. Private channel. Same anonymous sender. This time just one word. Congratulations. Kaler stared at it. Then he typed back for the first time into that anonymous thread. Who are you? The reply came in 11 seconds. Someone who needed you to move first. Then the account went dark. And somewhere across the city, in a Baltimore office building, a call had already been placed. A voice that didn't introduce itself. A message that didn't require explanation. The Varelli power structure had just shifted, and people who track power for a living had noticed. The townhouse was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Not peaceful. Deliberate. 3-bedroom property in a controlled residential block. Security camera at the front entrance. A detail stationed in a vehicle across the street. Meals delivered twice a day by a Varelli contracted service. Soren had been moved here 6 days after leaving the hospital. For your safety, they had told him again. He hadn't written anything back this time. He sat near the window in the late afternoon light with both twins asleep in the double bassinet behind him. The room smelled like warm milk and the faint antiseptic still clinging to hospital-issue blankets he hadn't replaced yet. His notebook was open in his lap. He was not writing. He was just holding it. The way people hold something when they don't know what else to do with their hands. Soren had grown up understanding that silence wasn't the same as absence. His father had taught him that, before everything changed, before the settlement, before the months of quiet that followed. His father used to say that the loudest things in any room were the things people chose not to say. Soren had lived that. He had built a whole life around it. But this kind of silence was different. This was the kind that came from the outside in. The kind that got installed around you while you were too exhausted to fight it. The kind wrapped in security details and meal schedules and 3 locks on a door you technically weren't prevented from opening. He could leave, technically, but where he would go, what he would carry, and what would happen to the 2 sleeping infants behind him if he did. Those questions had a way of making the door feel heavier than it was. The knock came at 9:47 p.m., not the security detail. Their knock was a pattern, two quick, one slow, identifying. This was different. Single. Direct. Soren stood, crossed to the door. He opened it. Kaler stood in the hallway alone. No detail. No Zevin. No briefcase or phone in his hand. He was still in a suit jacket, but the tie was gone. Top button undone. A version of undone that, for most men, would look casual, and for Kaler just looked like the end of a long day that hadn't finished deciding what it cost. Soren stepped back from the door. Not an invitation, exactly. Just a gap. Kaler came inside. He stood in the middle of the small living room and looked at the bassinet. Both twins still sleeping. He looked at them for a long time, longer than the look in the hospital, which had been assessment. This was something else. Something without a name in the Varelli vocabulary. Soren sat back in the chair by the window. He picked up his notebook but didn't open it. Kaler looked at him. The security around this building will be reduced to standard residential protocols starting tomorrow, he said. You'll have access to a full legal team. Independent, not Varelli retained. Your own counsel. Soren listened. The classification has been removed. Formally. From every internal system. Soren's expression didn't shift. Kaler moved a few feet closer. Not to the chair. Not crowding. Just reducing the space between them to something that required less effort to speak across. There is a situation with Draven that I'm managing. I can't explain all of it. Not tonight. But the structure around you was used as part of something I didn't authorize. And I need you to know that. Soren looked at him for a moment. Then he reached for the notebook, opened it to a clean page, wrote 7 words, turned it around. Was I strategy too? At the beginning. Kaler read it. He didn't answer immediately. That matters. Because Kaler Varelli always had an answer. He had built a life on having answers at the exact speed required to keep rooms from filling with doubt. He had nothing. Not because the question didn't have an answer. Because any answer he gave right now would be incomplete. And incomplete truth in a room this small felt worse than silence. He looked at the twins. The nearest one, the one slightly smaller, the one who had cried first, shifted in the bassinet. Small arms moving. A sound that was almost a word and wasn't. Without deciding to, Kaler crossed to the bassinet. He picked the boy up, carefully, with the stiff, unfamiliar care of someone who understood the theory of something they had never practiced. The crying stopped. Immediately, like a switch. The infant made one small sound, not distress, not demand, just acknowledgement, then settled against Kaler's chest with the full, immediate trust that only very new things carry, because they haven't learned yet which people are safe and which ones aren't. Kaler stood there holding his son, and across the room Soren watched him. The notebook was still in his lap, turned to the page with the question that hadn't been answered. The question was still there. It would still need answering, but something had shifted in the room. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just 1 inch less distance. And in a room that had been held at maximum distance for months, 1 inch was not nothing. The memo went out at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. No announcement. No press release. No company-wide email with Kaler's name at the top and carefully chosen words about values and legacy. Just a memo, distributed internally to division heads across Varelli Consolidated's 12 operating arms. Marked standard priority. Formatted like a compliance update, which is exactly how Kaler wanted it to read. Because the ones who needed to understand what it meant would understand. And the ones who needed to not see it coming wouldn't. The document ran 14 pages. Adiz Moro had spent 72 hours on the language. She had a background in labor law before she came to the Varelli operation. A fact that Kaler had known and quietly valued for years without ever creating the conditions for her to use it. That changed now. Page 1 removed leverage classification language from all internal designation systems. Not archived. Removed. Any individual carrying a classification tied to external exposure history or family member liability would be reclassified under standard contract terms within 30 days. Page 4 established independent healthcare access for all Omega-designated individuals under Varelli employment or security management. Not Varelli administered. Third party. With records maintained outside the internal system. Page 7 created an oversight position, not internal, filled by appointment from an independent labor review board. The position had subpoena capacity over Varelli financial records tied to labor sourcing and classification. Page 11 acknowledged historical port routing practices in Savannah and Newark. Not as admission of current liability, Adiz was careful about the legal framing, but as documented acknowledgement that the practices had existed, that they had caused measurable harm, and that the restructuring was in part a response to that history. Kaler signed every page. He did not celebrate it. He filed it. Because that was the thing about structural reform, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like correcting something that should never have needed correcting, and then waiting to see if the correction held. Zevin found him in his office at 10 a.m. He came in without knocking, which was normal, and sat across the desk without being invited, which was also normal. He read the memo summary that Kaler slid across to him without speaking. He read it twice. Then he looked up. "Are you weakening us?" he asked. Kaler leaned back in his chair. "No," he said. "I'm stabilizing us." Zevin considered that. He wasn't like Draven. He didn't have Draven's need to control outcomes from 3 steps ahead. He had a different quality. A kind of cold patience that made him very good at waiting for things to clarify before he committed. "The Savannah language," he said. "That's the part that moves." "I know. If former workers use that acknowledgement as a legal foothold, then we defend on the merits," Kaler said. "Which we can. Because the current structure is clean. The historical liability is capped." Adiz checked it 6 ways. "That's not what I mean. I mean the optics move before the legal process does. The story gets written before we can shape it." "The story is already written," Kaler said. "It's been written since Soren's father put his name on those documents 12 years ago. The only question is whether we respond to it or we build a structure that makes the response unnecessary." Zevin was quiet for a moment. Then, "Draven is moving through the secondary channels. He retained outside counsel this morning. I expected that. He's also had 2 conversations with Renata Foss's office in the last 48 hours. Kaler looked up. That was new. That was Draven choosing a side. Not just protecting his own position but actively building towards something. Renata Foss didn't have conversations that weren't transactional. If Draven was talking to her people, he was offering something. The question was what? "Watch it," Kaler said. "Don't intercept. Don't flag it externally. Just watch." Zevin nodded. He stood. Moved toward the door. Stopped. "The children," he said, without turning around. "Are you going to give them names?" Kaler looked at his desk. At the legal filing sitting in the corner of his workspace, the one with the 2 placeholder lines. "Yes," he said. Zevin nodded once. Walked out. The office went quiet. Kaler pulled the filing toward him. He sat with a pen in his hand for a long time. Not writing. Just thinking about what a name means when you give it. About the difference between documentation and declaration. About how 2 words on a legal form could be the most honest thing a man like him had said in years. His secure phone buzzed. Adiz. 1 line. Media suppression held. But the Baltimore ports flagged 3 irregular vessel inspections this morning. Someone is testing the boundary. Kaler read it, set the phone down, picked up the pen, and wrote 2 names on the form. He came back to the townhouse on a Thursday night. No call ahead. No scheduled time. He had learned from the last visit that the security detail called ahead when Varelli principals were inbound, which meant Soren had time to prepare, to sit up straighter, to close the notebook, to arrange his face into something that didn't give too much away. This time, Kaler told the detail to stand down from the advance call. He knocked at the door himself. Soren opened it after a pause that was slightly longer than last time. He looked at Kaler. Then he stepped aside. The twins were awake. Both of them. One in the bassinet, moving his legs like he was testing what they did. The other one was in a small bouncer seat near the couch, examining the ceiling with the complete focus that only very young things have. The kind of focus that hasn't been taught yet what's worth watching and what isn't. Kaler sat down on the couch. Not near the bassinet. Not positioned for maximum authority or maximum distance. Just sat. Like a person who had decided not to calculate placement for once. Soren sat across from him. The notebook was on the table. Neither of them reached for it yet. Kaler looked at his son in the bouncer. Watched him study the ceiling. Then he looked at Soren. I protected the throne, he said. Pause. And I failed you. For seconds of silence. Not the heavy, pressurized silence of the hospital. Not the deliberate silence of the boardroom. Something different. The kind that comes after a true thing gets said in a room small enough to hold it. Soren held his expression steady. He was good at that. Better than almost anyone Kaler had encountered. Most people either go still because they're suppressing something or because they've already decided. Soren went still in a third way, like he was actually hearing it, taking the time to let it land fully before he responded. He reached for the notebook, opened it, wrote, turned it. I know the difference between strategy and cruelty. I know which one you chose. Kaler read it. He didn't look relieved. That matters. Because relief would have been the wrong response. Relief would have been about him. About being absolved. About the weight lifting. He looked at the words and he held them. He let the distinction sit between strategy and cruelty, and the fact that knowing the difference didn't mean the damage was smaller. Just differently shaped. The children have names now, he said. Legally filed. Soren looked at him. Waiting. Easton, Kaler said. And Remy. Soren's chest moved. One breath. Deeper than the ones before it. He looked at the bassinet. Then at the bouncer. He mouthed something. The names, testing them in the silence where his voice couldn't go. He looked back at Kaler. Wrote again. Did you choose those? Yes, Kaler said. Another pause. Soren looked down at the page. He didn't write anything else. He closed the notebook over his fingers, not all the way, just partially. Like he was keeping his place. The twin in the bouncer, Easton, now made a sound. High and short. Not distress. Just announcement. I'm here. I'm awake. Something should happen now. Kaler reached over and put 2 fingers against Easton's open palm. The infant grabbed them immediately. Full grip. No hesitation. Soren watched. And for the first time since the hospital, since the hallway, since the step backward, since the hand that dropped, something in Soren's face moved. Not a smile. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the thing that comes before forgiveness. The thing that says, I see you trying. He shifted on the couch. 1 inch. Toward Kaler. Not much. But the room was small enough that 1 inch meant something. Kaler didn't comment on it. Didn't look up from Easton's grip. Didn't make it into a moment by naming it. He just stayed. And that, the staying, was the part Soren hadn't been sure of. Until now. Outside, at 11:41 p.m., a car sat at the corner of the block. Engine off. No plates visible from the security camera angle. It had been there for 22 minutes. The detail clocked it at 11:53. By midnight it was gone. But it had been there. And someone had been watching. The call came at 12:19 a.m. Kaler was still in the car heading back from the townhouse when his private encrypted line activated. Not a text. A call. Voice only. He answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was measured. Male. The kind of measured that came from practice, the way people speak when they've rehearsed the power of their own pauses. Congratulations on the heirs, the voice said. Kaler said nothing. Power shifts attract attention. You know that better than most. Still nothing from Kaler. We've been watching the Varelli restructuring with interest. The memo, the compliance oversight, the public acknowledgement language being drafted. A pause. It reads like a man preparing a new foundation, which means the old alliances need reassessing. Get to the ask, Kaler said. A beat. A formal arrangement. Varelli Northern Ports aligned with our distribution network. Existing contracts restructured under a shared classification system. Joint security architecture. Another pause. The children would formalize it. A documented lineage connection. Nothing public. Just structural. The car moved through a dark intersection. Kaler looked at the city sliding past the window. You want to use my sons as contract architecture, he said. I want to offer your sons a very secure future, the voice said, which you are currently not positioned to guarantee alone. Draven is building. Renata Foss has taken 3 meetings with his counsel in the past 4 days. You are managing a restructuring, a legal filing, an internal suspension, and a rival watching your port vulnerabilities in real time. That's a lot of open fronts. That was accurate. That was the problem with accurate threats. They moved differently than empty ones. They had weight. And if I decline, Kaler said, then the hospital footage gets a context it doesn't currently have. Narrative, framing, distribution. A mute omega in labor. An alpha stepping backward. 2 words. A pause. Release it. Kaler said 2 words back. Release it. Silence. Not the managed kind. The genuine kind. The kind that meant the other person hadn't expected that answer and needed a second to recalibrate. I'm sorry, the voice said. You heard me, Kaler said. Release it. Whatever you have. Release it. That would damage. It would show a man at a hospital at 3 in the morning, Kaler said. It would show a step backward. It would show 2 words said in a room where something was already broken. And it would also show that the same man restructured his entire operation, removed exploitative classifications, filed legal recognition for his children, and is currently on the record doing all of it. He let that sit. You need the footage to land before the record exists. You're too late. Another silence. Longer. The Draven Alliance is a man who moved money to fund a leak, Kaler said. That documentation exists. Any arrangement he builds carries that weight. Ask Renata if she wants that in her structure. The line was quiet. Kaler looked at the city. The arrangement is declined, he said. Then he hung up. First, he sat in the back of the car with the encrypted phone in his hand and the city going past. His pulse was even. His hands were still. The choice had been clear the moment the voice mentioned Easton and Remy. Not because it was simple, because some things clarify what matters faster than a year of careful thinking. He opened a new message to Adiz. Prepare a full transparency package. Hospital timeline. Restructuring documentation. Legal filings. Full record. I want it ready to go public on my authorization. Her reply came in 40 seconds. Already drafted. Waiting on your word. He looked at it. Then he looked out at the city. He thought about Soren in that townhouse. Both twins asleep now. Easton gripping fingers. Remy examining ceilings. A notebook on a table with a folded corner marking the page with a question that still hadn't been fully answered. He typed back to Adiz. Hold it until morning. Then we move. The press conference was at 11 a.m. No theatrical backdrop. No row of attorneys. No podium draped in the Varelli corporate color scheme that the PR team had suggested 3 times and been denied 3 times. Just a room. A table. 2 microphones. Adiz to his left, off-screen. The legal team behind the door. And Soren standing to his right. Not behind him. Not arranged as visual context or emotional support prop. Standing beside him at equal depth, equal distance from the table. A positioning so small that most cameras wouldn't consciously register it. But anyone who understood rooms like this would see it. Kaler had asked Soren to be there. Not told. Asked. Written it in a note, actual paper, his handwriting. and had it delivered to the townhouse the morning before. Soren had written back one word. Okay. The reporters in the room numbered 14. Screened. Selected not by reach but by accuracy, journalists with documented track records of printing what was said, not what was constructed around what was said. Kaler stood at the microphone. He did not open with gratitude. He did not open with an apology. He opened with fact. 11 days ago, my sons were born at Eastside General. Their names are Easton Varelli and Remy Varelli. They are legally documented, fully protected, and acknowledged without condition. He paused. Not for effect. For breath. 6 days ago, I initiated internal restructuring across Varelli Consolidated. That restructuring removes Omega leverage classifications from all internal designation systems, establishes independent healthcare access for individuals under Varelli management, and creates a third-party compliance oversight position with audit authority. He looked up from his notes. This is not in response to external pressure. It is a correction of practices that should have been corrected before I took operational control. And I am the one responsible for it not happening sooner. One of the reporters shifted in her seat. That line, I am the one responsible, had a different weight than the rest. He felt it land. Good. I also want to acknowledge a history I have not previously addressed publicly. Labor routing practices in Varelli port operations in Savannah and Newark. Practices operating prior to my operational authority, but within the Varelli corporate structure, caused documented harm to Omega workers under exploitative classification systems. That harm was real. The people affected were real. This restructuring does not erase that. But it is the beginning of a structural response to it. He closed his folder. One question from the floor. Then two. He answered both directly. Short. No excess. The third question was about Soren. A reporter near the back, young, a recorder held at shoulder height. Can you tell us about the individual standing with you? Kaler looked at Soren. Soren looked back at him. No notebook. No paper. He had come to this room without either, which Kaler had noticed the moment he arrived. A choice. A deliberate one. He is the father of my children, Kaler said. His name is Soren Hale. He is here because he chose to be. Nothing else needs to be added to that. The room held for a moment. Then the next question moved to the restructuring timeline, and the moment passed the way moments do, absorbed into the record, documented, permanent. The conference ended at 11:34 a.m. The room cleared. Adiz moved efficiently to the back table. The legal team materialized. Voices, papers, the normal machinery of aftermath. Soren stood near the sidewall. Kaler crossed to him. They stood close enough that the noise of the room required less volume than normal conversation. Kaler didn't speak immediately. Soren looked at him with the same quality of stillness he always carried. The kind that didn't ask for anything. That didn't perform patience because it was already there, already practiced, already worn smooth by years of living in a world that moved too fast for him and expected him to keep up anyway. Kaler said quietly, I still owe you an answer. Soren tilted his head. Waiting. The beginning, Kaler said. You asked if you were strategy at the beginning. He thought about how to say this. Not the polished version. Not the one that reflected well. At the beginning, he said, I knew who your father was. I knew what that meant in the context of the structure I was managing. That was true. He didn't look away. And at the beginning, something else was also true at the same time. Both things existed. I can't separate them cleanly, and I won't try. Soren absorbed that. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to Kaler. Kaler opened it. One line. I already knew. I needed you to say it. He held the paper for a moment. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his own pocket. That night, the penthouse was quiet. Easton and Remy were asleep in the nursery, a real one now. Not a hospital bassinet, not a townhouse setup assembled with security in mind. A room designed with them in mind. Soren sat near the window. Kaler stood on the other side of the room. He moved first, crossed the space between them, sat down beside Soren without architecture, without strategy, without the careful management of how it would look or what it would mean for anything outside this room. Soren looked at him, and for the first time he reached out. Not desperate, not uncertain, not the trembling hand of a hospital bed at 3 a.m. Steady. Kaler didn't step back. He didn't manage it. He just received it. The hand, the proximity, the weight of what it meant to still be here after everything that had tried to reduce this to something smaller. The city sat below them, lit and humming. The twins breathed in the next room. And in the quiet of that penthouse, the most powerful man on the East Coast finally understood what none of his structures had ever taught him. Control wasn't the thing that held everything together. Presence was. And the difference between those two things had cost him nearly everything. It was not going to cost him this. That's where their story lands. Not in a declaration. Not in a perfect reunion. In a room. 2 people. And a choice made without guarantees. If the story moved something in you, the silence, the sacrifice, the moment he finally stepped forward instead of back. Share it. Let someone else find it who needs it tonight. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built for the person who needed to hear something real. You never know which one is going to be the one that changes how somebody sees their own situation. Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit hardest for you. The delivery room, the boardroom, or the night he finally sat down without a strategy. Your comment might be exactly what someone else needed to read.